The three sites, Seville, Port Royal, and Spanish Town, are symbols of the various stages of Jamaican history, because they represent the various stages in our history in which we were involved with external countries in a colonial status, and the last of the stages when we began to emerge as a free people, first through emancipation and abolition of slavery in the middle of the last century until today when we are an independent country. And that is why we are seeking to restore them. Not just because they are grand monuments, not just because Seville is one of the most important historical sites in the world, not because Port Royal is perhaps the most important underwater archaeological site in the world, because an entire town, or was a city in those days, is buried in 20 feet of water. Not because Spanish Town is one of the most beautiful Georgian squares in the entire world, but because in addition to all these things, they play a very symbolic role in our history and therefore in our national heritage.
I'm Michael London. This is my birthplace, my country, a corner of the world I cherish for its infinite beauty, its generous soul, its rich and tumultuous history. Jamaica is a vibrant country which has played a major role in the shaping of our Western Hemisphere. Unfortunately, much of the tangible evidence of its history has been destroyed or lies beneath this ground. Some archaeological excavations have already unearthed treasures, clues, pieces of the puzzle, but they've only scratched the surface. The need to unlock and preserve the past has taken on a new significance since the coming of independence in 1962.
At dawn on a May morning in 1494, a gentle breeze teased these shores of St. Anne's Bay as it had for centuries, awakening the forests, mountains, and countryside. On this fateful day, the Arawak villagers, the sole proprietors of these pristine lands, tended their fruit crops of soursop, mammy apple, guava, and papaya. The farmers cultivated fields and gardens of manioc, sweet potatoes, maize, allspice, and a plant which later became one of the world's most important cash crops, tobacco. Others hunted and fished from canoes, an Arawak invention, and craftspeople made pottery, wove cotton clothing, and hammocks, another Arawak invention. There was little to threaten the existence and culture of the Arawaks until the arrival of Christopher Columbus. Inspired by Marco Polo's discoveries in the Orient and his tales of the unfathomable riches of the Indies, Columbus, on his second voyage, searched the islands of the Caribbean for evidence that he had indeed found a new route to those fabulous lands.
Hearing from the Cuban Indians about an island called Jamaica, or Land of the Blessed Gold, Columbus sailed south and anchored here at St. Anne's Bay on May 5th, 1494. Columbus found the Indians hostile, but their resistance broke after he let loose a ferocious bloodhound which savagely attacked them.
On the third day following Columbus's arrival, a party of 6 Arawaks brought peace offerings of cassava, fruit, and fish.
For the Arawaks, it would be their first encounter with Western diplomacy, commerce, and duplicity. For Columbus, Jamaica would be a brief conquest of minor consequence. Disappointing also, since no gold had been found. But he would see these shores again. In fact, the Arawaks would save his life. 9 years later, during his 4th voyage, he had to run his 2 battered, worm-eaten, sinking caravels onto St. Anne's Sand. Columbus was to be marooned here for a year until his rescue, surviving on food provided by the Arawaks.
However, relations with the Arawaks, who worshipped the sun and the moon god, were often uncertain. When faced by an impending cutoff of food and fresh water by the Arawaks, Columbus, an experienced astronomer, threatened to extinguish the light of the moon god. Disbelief turned to horror as the innocent Arawaks witnessed a lunar eclipse predicted and dramatically embellished by Columbus. They quickly offered to resume their supplies if Columbus would restore the light of their god, which the slow passing of the Earth's shadow gradually revealed once again. His survival and life with the Arawaks would deeply affect Columbus for the remaining 3 years of his life. On his deathbed in Spain, he chose Jamaica as the single land he wished to bequeath to his heirs.
This year-long encounter between 2 civilizations marked the painful birth of a new country. It also raised the curtain on an era marked by exploitation of man, upheavals, takeovers, heroic rebellions, wars, romance, defeats, and victories.
Diego, Columbus's son, fulfilled his father's last wishes and established a town on the site of his father's 367-day ordeal. It was called Sevilla la Nueva, or New Seville. Loosely patterned on the layout of Seville in Spain, Nueva Sevilla grew rapidly around a fort,
a governor's house, a stone church built by Arawak masons and never quite finished, and a sugar mill which produced 300 pounds of sugar yearly. Allspice, a native plant which Columbus had introduced to Spain, was also cultivated. The Spanish later introduced citrus fruits, the banana and the coconut palm, from the tropical possessions. But the settlement never thrived, and its future as the first capital of Jamaica would be short-lived. Surrounded by mangrove swamps where malaria and yellow fever-bearing mosquitoes bred, it was abandoned by most of its inhabitants after 25 years.
New Seville later became a plantation under the British, and this great house is tangible evidence of that period. In 1534, a new capital was founded on the broad, fertile plains of the south coast of the island, at what is called today Spanish Town. The Spanish called it Villa de la Vega, or Town of the Plain. It became the center of administrative affairs for Spanish Jamaica. For all its beauty and fertility, Jamaica never attracted many colonists. Jamaica had no gold. Those who did settle were granted large parcels of land with Arawak slave labor to work the fields. To supplement Arawak labor, the Spanish turned to Africa, systematically importing Africans from the Gulf of Benin and what is now Nigeria. They brought the slave trade to the New World.
Colonialism and slavery had emerged on this peaceful island, but the Arawaks, whom Columbus had called ingenious and free men, could not survive slave conditions. In less than 100 years, they would totally vanish, victims of the conquistadors' cruelty, diseases, and greed. Today, Jamaica retains its original Indian name, which translates not as the land of the blessed gold, but the land of wood and water, and honors the Arawaks on its national coat of arms.
Jamaica had been the only New World settlement from which the monarchs of Spain failed to extract a profit. Jamaica became a supply depot in the conquest of Mexico and the lands to its south. To meet the conquistadors' need for food and horses, cattle and livestock were bred on the open savanna. In fact, it was the Africans who became herdsmen, hunters, and cowboys. Spain could have exploited the island's agricultural resources or even taken advantage of the island's strategic value. Instead, they left Jamaica defenseless, its coasts unprotected. In the aftermath of the 1640 Civil War in England, Oliver Cromwell, the new Lord Protector of the British Commonwealth, realized the strategic and political value of the Caribbean islands. Cromwell wanted to seize the more developed and richer islands of Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, and Cuba. But driven off Santo Domingo after a near massacre, the British expeditionary forces settled for the poorly defended consolation prize, Jamaica. It took 5 years of fighting against a die-hard group of Spaniards and Africans before victory was at last secure. The English soon realized what their predecessors had ignored, that Jamaica was indeed a prize worth taking and keeping. Fortifications were quickly built to defend against new enemies. In 1660, to celebrate the restoration of the English monarchy, this site was christened Port Royal.
This garrison, originally called Fort Cromwell, was renamed Fort Charles in honor of King Charles II. By 1690, 6 forts containing 300 large cannon would render Port Royal impregnable.
The tiny cape quickly developed into a bustling civilian settlement. In 1688, 8,000 people lived here. 5,000 English and Scots, a few Spaniards, and 3,000 Africans. There were also as many as 2,000 visitors in town on any given day. What had attracted them in such numbers? And why had they flocked to Port Royal? They simply went where the money was. Gold, silver, pearls, and emeralds circulated freely in the streets. In the harbor, large English merchantmen unloaded their cargoes of European goods, textiles, tools, paper, and glass.
Port Royal became the trading center of the New World, a haven for contraband and plunder.
A teeming metropolis with its 2,000 brick and wood buildings, its high church, St. Paul's, its governor's house, the King's Warehouse, its myriad shops, taverns, and brothels. Corruption and vice swept over the town a contemporary observer called the most wicked and sinful city in the world. Chief among the revelers were adventurers, assorted cutthroats, and the men whose exploits were to be immortalized by Hollywood, and who brought Port Royal its lasting fame, the Buccaneers. Their infamous deeds brought them into national notoriety. The fearless Dutchman known as Rock Brasiliano, Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard. Towering above them all was Captain Henry Morgan, who elevated himself to commander of all Port Royal privateers. The British tacitly encouraged these swashbuckling commandos. They performed a great service for England and its infant colonies by containing Spanish sea power in the Caribbean. On Tuesday, June 7, 1692, Port Royal paid for its sins. Suddenly, without warning, at 20 minutes before noon, the earth opened to swallow what many regarded as a modern-day Sodom. A tidal wave followed the earthquake, engulfing 2/3 of the town, which still today lies beneath the sea. In the next 2 centuries, Port Royal rose again to become an important naval establishment and the headquarters of the British fleet in the Caribbean. Many of Admiral Nelson's and Admiral Rodney's legendary victories were launched from Port Royal. This hospital was built from prefabricated cast iron parts imported from England in 1820. It has withstood earthquakes, tidal waves, and hurricanes. After the catastrophe, the political, administrative, and social center of Jamaica reverted to Spanish Town.
The English had destroyed most of the Spanish buildings, and new structures were built in this old square. A residence for the governor called King's House.
A house of assembly to accommodate the colonial government. A courthouse for the dispensation of British colonial law. And a Rodney Memorial, erected to commemorate Admiral Rodney's victory over the French at the Battle of the Saints.
Here took place the great debates, decisions, and proclamations which shaped Jamaica society from the time of the Spaniards until 1872, when the town ceased to be the capital of Jamaica. It was here that news of the latest political crises circulated. This square saw all the great figures who visited from abroad: Horatio Nelson, Captain Bligh, and Simon Bolivar.
Jamaican patriots like George William Gordon and Paul Bogle came here also, seeking ways to improve life for the Jamaican people. Not all of the colony's wealth was lost with the destruction of Port Royal. In fact, much of the riches accumulated by the pirates stimulated the development of Jamaica's plantation economy. The British decided to bank on sugar when they seized Jamaica, and by 1739, the number of sugar plantations all over the island had grown to over 430. Jamaica was about to become the single largest producer of sugar on earth. Jamaica's sugar-based rum exports, especially to the New England colonies, reinforced the island's role as the leading commercial and trading center in the Western Hemisphere. This fact contributed to the refusal of King George III to accept an offer to swap Jamaica for the 13 American mainland colonies. The establishment of such a powerful sugar industry is one of the most significant industrial developments in modern history. It could be argued, in fact, that the Industrial Revolution actually started in the West Indies with the development of highly productive and profitable sugar plantations at a time when the only European industry was shipbuilding.
The English brought thousands of Africans from all over the western coastal belt of the continent to work as slaves on these plantations. And by 1800, they numbered more than 300,000, or 9/10 of the population. While the English denied them their freedom, they could not suppress their African heritage. They brought their own music and dance, languages and religions. Many of these influences are still reflected in today's Jamaica.
Slavery, that most brutal of institutions, would plunge Jamaica into a long series of bloody revolts. At the time of the British takeover, many of the Spanish Africans who had assisted in the fight against the British retreated to the mountains. They were called Maroons, from the Spanish word cimarron, meaning wild. For over 76 years, these Maroons waged guerrilla warfare never before experienced by the British. The first Jamaican heroes were Maroon leaders like Nanny, Cudjoe, and Quao. In 1739, peace treaties were signed with the Maroons. These treaties granted them ownership of their lands and towns. The treaties required the Maroons to help fight rebels and recapture runaway slaves they had formerly assisted. But this did not prevent the slaves from fighting for freedom. The last rebellion before slavery was abolished broke out during the 1831 Christmas holiday.